This is TWiT. Our guest for this show is Kate O'Neill, Chief Executive, business writer, speaker. She's the founder of KO Insights, a strategic advisory firm who advises some of the biggest and the best, including in just the A's, Adobe, Amsterdam, and Austin. That's just the A's.
That's just the A's.
Just the A's. Hi, Kate. It's great to have you.
Thank you, Leo. I don't have a lava lamp or a cowboy hat.
But you have a whiteboard, Kate.
There's always time.
I always admire whiteboards.
Yeah, it's good. If you have a whiteboard, you can have anything, can't you?
Yes.
That's true.
That's true.
She's the author of a brand new book, What Matters Next? A Leader's Guide to Make... Oh, look at that.
Good.
It's emerging.
Well done.
Making human-friendly tech decisions in a world that's moving too fast. Too true.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
So I hear.
Yeah. So this show is particularly about AI, and there is no subject moving faster than AI. It is a revolution, I think, somewhat akin to the Industrial Revolution, the invention of the internet, all rolled into one. And we're struggling here to understand it better.
It's not just the speed; it's the scale, the scope, right?
Yeah, it's everywhere. Impact. Right.
It's the web we weave. It's it's all that.
Nicely done.
Nicely done.
It's also our guest last week kind of highlighted this. Difficult to separate the good from the bad, the AI con, the AI hype from the AI reality, which makes it even difficult for business leaders. I'm sure that there's a lot of pressure from their stakeholders. Where's your AI strategy? But at the same time, you don't want to start doing something that's not going to help you. How do you help them cut through that?
That's just the thing. I think a lot of times with emerging technology of any sort, what's your fill in the blank strategy is a very common question, and it's the wrong question because it should never be about leading with the technology. You have a strategy, and AI may or may not be helpful in helping you deploy that strategy, amplify, accelerate what you're trying to do, but it should not be led by the technology. You lose complete sight of what it is you're trying to accomplish if you allow yourself to be, your dog to be wagged by the tail or something like that. Is that how that works?
Your sandwich to be grasped by the crust, I believe we decided.
Yes.
Kate,
what should they be thinking about?
So you should be thinking about alignment between the business objectives and the human outcomes. You should be thinking about what your business exists to do and is trying to do at scale. That's its purpose. We talk a lot about purpose in business and in leadership, and it sounds really esoteric. It sounds really flighty and fluffy. But I think if you really think of it as just a distillation of what it is you're trying to do and that you can articulate in, say, 3 to 5 words, no more, that is strategic synchronization. And if you can do that and then align it with what people outside the organization are trying to do when they meet and marry up with what you are trying to accomplish, you can think about that alignment and use technology and data and algorithms and all the rest of that to amplify and accelerate that alignment as opposed to simply amplifying, the objectives of the business, because those can go haywire. Those can go off into unintended consequences land, and nobody wants to see that happen. We would like to see there to be some synergy between what businesses are trying to accomplish in the world and what humans individually are trying to accomplish in the world.
Kate, I love that you call yourself a tech humanist, and I want to probe that for a minute, because my argument of late is I think that the world changed with Sputnik, and STEM took over, and the humanities and the social sciences and the arts kind of lose out, and even in universities aren't as valued as they used to be or should be, and in society not. So define yourself as a tech humanist, and what does humanism mean in this modern context?
Well, I think there's a lot of layers to it, but for me, it has to do a lot with what you're talking about. The humanities layer is a really important construct. I am a linguist by education. I'm also a fan.
Another linguist.
Another linguist.
We had one last week.
I was bombarded by a linguist last week. You're not an academic linguist anymore, though, yeah?
Not anymore. No, I'm more of a practicing and very practicing linguist. I love languages.
Good.
I love learning languages. Oh, cool. Yeah, we'll have to compare notes.
All right, I'm going to feel really stupid. What languages do you speak?
I think speak is a really tough
benchmark,
all right.
What
right?
feel at all comfortable with? Can't order dinner in.
I study 30 languages.
What? What?
There are only a few of them can I order the next round of beer in, and I think that's really the benchmark we should be trying to hit.
All right,
that's
stay on this for a
great.
second.
I
How
love
did
it.
you get from that obvious love of linguistics and languages to what you're doing now?
So I was heading up the language laboratory at the University of Illinois at Chicago in the early 90s when the web came about. And I built the first departmental website at the University of Illinois at Chicago at a time when, as you may recall, like websites were being curated manually onto what's new and what's cool lists.
Yep.
And my site made it onto a what's new list, not a what's
Mazel.
cool list, but thank you. And it got noticed by a guy at Toshiba in California. He recruited me to come out and build an intranet for them. It turned out to be the
Wow.
first intranet at Toshiba. So that started a stint in Silicon Valley in the mid-90s during as you know, a heyday of innovation. And
Well,
that
and
culminated.
you were just down the road from Urbana, where a young kid
Yeah.
named Mark
Yeah.
Andreessen was writing the first browser, one of the first browsers.
Yeah, that figures into what matters next. I call out Mark Andreessen by name in the book because it's so interesting to me that we were at sister schools at
He was
really
at Urbana,
similar times.
right.
And I was at Chicago. And what he put together with Mosaic was really, really important. And obviously it shaped the web as we know it. I think when I saw the graphical web for the first time, it blew my mind. I thought, this is going to change everything.
Yeah, I had the
And
same
obviously
reaction.
it did.
Yeah. Oh, and then you were smart. You jumped on it. I was
just so
started doing
curious about
podcasts. No, I didn't do them back then. We didn't have them back then.
What do you
But
think about
the-
Andreessen today as an accelerationist, which you mentioned acceleration?
I think that's the challenge, is that Andreessen has a very unique perspective from his bubble world, and I don't think that it's the same as what many of us experience. I think that the ramifications of acceleration are too harsh for most people and for humanity at scale. So when we think about the impacts of running headlong into AI deployment without thinking about the consequences, we run the risk of amplifying bias, of amplifying polarization, and all of the many kinds of net negative effects that we know can happen with technology at scale that has not been sort of fully vetted for its place in society and how it's going to impact the world and human experience.
Yeah, and then you get people like Mark Zuckerberg also in a bubble saying, well, people only have 3 friends, so we're going to give them AI friends to make up for the difference.
Yeah, and that
not
a squirrel
humanist.
dying in your backyard is more important than, some famine in Africa or something like that. That kind of skewed perspective is not really helpful to us.
Right. Is that part of the problem with AI, that it is being really created by those people? The Elon Musks, the Mark Andreessens, the Mark Zuckerbergs of the world?
Even Sam Altman, I think once you get inside of that Silicon Valley bubble, it's really hard to be connected to the rest of the world in terms of the speed of change, the expectation of how much change we can handle, the sort of connectedness of it all. And I think it's really hard. I think you can say the same about Washington, D.C. It's a very intrinsically connected kind of network, and it's very hard for people inside of D.C. to see outside of their bubble. Similarly, I think in Silicon Valley, you eat your own dog food and you're very, very bought in to the mythology of Silicon Valley. It doesn't occur to you that other people are not equally keeping pace with the many frontier models emerging every day and the varying theories on AGI and all that stuff that everybody else feels overwhelmed by every day.
How do you think that we fix that in terms of, I guess, Silicon Valley? I mean, how do you think that as an industry, is it possible for the leaders in charge of these companies creating leading AI models to eventually kind of broaden their horizons and incorporate perspectives beyond their own, or are we too far gone?
Yeah, I think it's such a good question, and it's such an important one. I think there's multiple layers to it. One is, if the people actually leading some of these top Silicon Valley companies and those adjacent to them are genuinely curious to kind of consider outside viewpoints and, horizons beyond their own. There are models in my book. They can talk to other consultants and advisors who will help them think about that kind of decision making. But I think even more importantly, it comes down to all of the other leaders of companies, associations, organizations, nonprofits, everything outside of that realm, to think about their adoption of technology, to think about their adoption of these types of norms, and to try to push back on that. I think that we need to look at that I introduce a model in What Matters Next called the Now Next Continuum, and it's meant to just connect our thinking in the present to the thinking in the future, so that the future doesn't feel so mysterious and unruly and daunting for people who don't spend their every waking moment considering future impacts, which most people don't. And they find it incredibly overwhelming to consider what the future brings, because it's just full of technology and geopolitical upheaval and economic instability and climate change and everything that feels too much. So they know that these decisions that they're making have huge consequences, and they want to try to better understand how to make them. So having a better model for making those decisions inside of those other companies helps. But I think also at the individual level, recognizing that we have a lot of power collectively in how the discourse that we have with one another, the decisions we make with our purchasing, with our app usage, with the data we choose to engage in sharing, with the platforms we choose to participate in. All of those things make a difference. They don't feel like they do sometimes at a microscopic level, but I think collectively those things do make a difference.
So I'm going to get some free consulting from you. I'm teaching. I'm teaching now at Stony Brook, and I'm not a real academic like you are. I snuck in through journalism.
I don't think Kate considers herself an academic anymore.
No,
I hope
I'm not.
Yeah. You're 30 languages. You learn too well.
She was. Yeah.
Well,
She consults Yale and Harvard, which shows she's very politically astute.
Always a Marine,
Yeah.
So I'm on the steering committee for a new program at Stony Brook called Tech, AI, and Society. And my hope is that it does exactly what you push for, is to bring humanism and humanities and the arts into the discussion, and not let it all be controlled by just the technologists. So I want to bring people from many disciplines into this. So I'm curious what you have a lot of really practical, good frameworks and advice for companies and for institutions. What about students? What about a college student coming into college right now thinking, I want to be around this AI stuff, but what should a university be responsible for teaching them?
Yeah, that's such a great and important question, too. I think that we do a disservice to students if we assume that STEM is the be-all, end-all of that discussion. We also do a disservice if we don't think that STEM is important. So it's very much a both-and to that discussion. I think we very much need our emerging students to have tech skills. We really need to reconnect them with human skills, though. Those soft skills like context and good judgment and emotional intelligence and kind of, pattern recognition and things like that. Those are the skills that I think transcend the emerging, sort of the changing skills in tech landscape. So we're always going to need to be able to synthesize information and make good decisions. We're always going to need to be able to articulate a good instruction. We're doing that with prompts and generative AI. We do it with delegating as a manager. Those kinds of, sort of clarifying what it is we're looking for and being able to articulate good instructions, that's a really, really important skill, no matter what context you're operating within. And I know, Leo, you were about to interject something.
No, because it makes me think that if for a long time you got a liberal education to be a generalist, but there's been so much pressure in this technological society of ours to become a specialist, that whether a physician or a scientist or a coder, there's pressure to narrow your focus, not broaden your focus.
Do you know, I think of that as a both and too. I think it's really so valuable to be able to see the world through a particular lens, have something that you're really passionate about and be able to understand very deeply. I think it's a T-shaped thing, though. I think it really helps to be able to go really broad across a range of subjects. Here we come back to humanities, right? Being well-versed in history and context and social studies and geography and really understanding the world around you and how those things interconnect. We're in a systems-driven world. Everything everything connects with everything else. All of these kinds of things that we're innovating upon, all the transformational kinds of things we're doing with digital connectedness, all of those things are going to impact everything else. It's impossible to pull back from globalization. It's impossible to pull back from an economy where things are interconnected, and like tariffs are going to cause downstream supply chain impacts and things like that. It's really important that we understand those kinds of consequences. And we won't understand it without having that breadth of systems thinking. But I think it also helps, like for me, language is a really good lens to look at things through and be able to understand, communication, semantics, meaning. Meaning is an incredibly valuable lens to understand what makes humans tick, what makes us connect with one another and what drives, I think, purpose, for example, is the shape that meaning takes in business. And so it becomes this really, really valuable, clarifying lens to have something you're really passionate about. And that's what a major can be for students in education. But I think we absolutely need to give the gift of a breadth of information, how those things connect with one another, how one topic pushes on another, how important it is to understand physics in order to understand math, and math in order to understand programming, and all of those kinds of things. So I think that's the world we're in, is that it really, really matters that we have both the generalist and the specialist perspective.
True. You can send the invoice to me. I'm curious, for you personally, as a linguist of longstanding, when ChatGPT comes out 2+ years ago, what was, and you follow technology, you've been writing about technology, but at that moment when the world reacted to the literate machine, what was your personal reaction to it the first time you started playing with it?
It was such a moment of this is what I have seen coming for a really long time.
Oh, interesting. Wow.
Yeah, that everybody's been asking me for so many years. It's always been a joke, like, oh, you were a German major and a Russian and linguistics double minor, and your grad work is in linguistics and language development, and you're a technology expert. Like, how does that compute? I'm like, I just think these things make a difference in a way that's really hard to articulate right now. But there are underpinnings. There are ways that natural language processing is bringing us around to, like, think about how Google understands the web through semantic relationships. Think about how, we've done so much of the underpinnings of the web and of technology on layers of language. And to me, that was one of the most gratifying moments when this tool came about that depends completely on natural language interaction. And that also, I think, just got everybody so excited about the potential for technology and about the potential for AI, because we could understand how to interact with it, because it was using what we use every single day. So that's where that was for me, and it still remains. I'm still fascinated by the reaction, the widespread reaction to not just ChatGPT, but the entire category of large language models and generative AI. And I think it has everything to do with the fact that we're interacting in our natural language, and it feels like we're just existing as humans in a world that feels very natural to us. We're beings and bodies. We're sense-driven. We make sense. We make meaning through our senses, and the way that we interact with the world is so driven by language. It just feels like an obvious extension of that. I don't think, by the way, that is inherently going to be the way we move through all the future modalities of AI and of various technologies. I just think it's a really important transitional one. I don't think we're going to lose it now that we have it. I think prompt-based and sort of natural language interaction with devices is going to continue to be a really important modality. But I think there are so many other sense-based modalities that we have yet to mine fully. I think we're going to be seeing a lot more
like
of that.
What?
Well, you think about the wide range of our senses. We've done a lot with gesture, but we haven't done everything we could do with gesture. We could think a lot about sort of auditory cues. These devices that I'm wearing right here, Apple's done a lot of really sophisticated stuff to try to filter out, meaningful noise from, signal and noise, and how you kind of traverse the world where you can, hear what you want to hear and filter out what you don't need to hear, but have something intrude when it's a matter of your safety. There's a lot of really meaningful parsing that can happen on sort of sensory levels and making sense of the world with us. And as we understand what human experience needs to be in different contexts and different modalities. So I think there's a whole matrix that you could do across all the senses and different modalities, contexts that we're in. And it's really exciting to think about where that could go.
It is a good point. We've kind of gone a little retrograde in computer user interfaces to the mouse and the keyboard. It's kind of a primitive, it didn't feel at the time primitive, but it is kind of a primitive way of interacting, that voice and speech and language ultimately are really our natural way of interacting, and a much better way. Yeah.
And unfortunately, I think, with the advent of smart speakers several years back, I think that was a really exciting time. Unfortunately, the problem with smart speakers and a lot of that area is it's all surveillance technology, and we don't have the right types of regulations and protections in order to make sure that devices listening in our homes are not being used against us, or that we're not being manipulated by the data that's being harvested in those contexts. So there's a lot of really, it comes again to these interconnected systems and being able to make sense of these complicated realities. But I think that there's a lot of potential there, but we just have to be very eyes wide open about the kind of systemic reality that they're operating within.
Yeah, it's funny that, it's not just the voice-activated devices. Everything you do nowadays online is surveilled, and it's the internet, the interconnected nature of our technologies that have made that possible. So it is 100%. Both a very real enabling technology, but it has some real pitfalls as well.
I think you find that across the board, right? Like you can point to just about anything and say, upside, downside. One of the things that I talk about in my second to last book, A Future So Bright, was the idea of strategic optimism, that the way we talk about the future historically has been dystopia versus utopia, and that's a really broken framework. Like it gives us, nobody believes that utopia is really on the table, so all we're really ever talking about is shades of dystopia.
Well said.
And then if we only think about things through shades of dystopia, what we're doing is discarding what utopia was doing for us in that sci-fi trope model. In the trope model, dystopia is telling us what we need to be cautious about, and utopia is telling us what we hope for. And if we discard one without the other, we don't have a very balanced perspective of how to build the future we actually want to build. So we need both of those things, and I call it strategic optimism, when we use the things that we want to be cautious of and know we should be fearful of in balance with the things that we really hope for and that we hope we can accomplish. I think there's a lot with emerging technology that can be so hopeful and we could do such bright and wonderful things with, while we're being very cautious not to allow these dystopian horrors to take place.
But it's an advisor. I love that. The utopianism gives us the vision of what we want, and dystopia cautions us about what the risks are, is a really nice way of thinking about that, so you don't cast one out.
Yeah, thanks. I think it's a really balanced and healthy way to think about the future. And it has more agency. It allows us to bring more of our decision-making selves to the decision-making process, the actionable process of what's the future we're trying to build.
I'm really gratified to see this is a hobby horse of mine, is long-termism and company. And I'm glad to see you quote Emile Torres and their critique of McCaskill and long-termism and that view. How do we grapple with the doomsters, with those who I think are extremists in their own kind of effort to claim that they can create utopia, but we should because we can trust them to prevent dystopia, and they've gained so much resource and so much attention and so much money. How do we deal with those, I think, crackpots?
It's so cynical, right? It's this idea that that the future is lost to us, and so we might as well, or that the present is lost to us, so we might as well build in an accelerated way toward the future, right? Like we owe it to future generations to build the fastest technology we can, to accelerate as fast as we can toward these future models. And to me, that's just malarkey, to borrow Joe Biden's term, right? It's so silly to me to think that we don't owe anything to the existing humans who are alive on this planet today. It is so out of step with any reality of anyone who travels the world and meets people any place in the world can can really dimensionalize the reality of humanity in other places. And if you don't, if you're living in that bubble where all you ever interact with are other billionaires in Silicon Valley, and that's all that matters to you, it's very easy to tune out the reality of billions of people living on the planet who are not living in that bubble and who very much would love to have their daily needs taken care of by more pragmatic technologies, more pragmatic solutions. So it's that balance of saying, look, we absolutely need to take care of the people who are alive today. We can't let them be victims and sort of wipe them to the side while we think about what imagined futures we are building toward. We have to have these things in balance with one another. And we can't allow ourselves to be too slow either. That's the other side of the equation, is that I think a lot of what we see when we think about dawdling and having all the information we need and yet failing to make decisions, that's the sort of thing where we see the foot dragging around climate action, for example, the things we know we absolutely need to do. And I say in the book a couple of times, in 10, 20 years, there is no climate action that we could take that would feel like we were too rash, right? Like we know we need to be acting much faster than we're acting. So it's that balance of, where are we overshooting the information we have and the confidence we should have in that
Right.
information, and where are we sort of dragging our feet around things we absolutely should have done yesterday? And that is a perpetual dilemma, and I think it's one that you can come up with those extremes to make it easy to digest and process. But for most leaders, most executives operating in $50 million companies to $1 billion companies, the realities don't feel quite that extreme. They're just trying to make sense of, how do I deal with the board pressuring me to do this and customers pressuring me to do this, and how do I balance those kinds of conflicts? And I think the tools work just as well. These kind of now next continuum and the through line thinking, the ability to try to keep those ends of the perspective in balance is just as effective no matter what level you're making those decisions at. It's effective for individuals too.
When you talk to these
Lugo.
business leaders, don't they say, "Oh, yeah, that's all well and good, but if I've got to compete with these other companies and they're going to take the cutthroat point of view, I don't have time, I don't have the luxury to be humanist."
There's some of that sense, but I think there's just as much a sense that there's got to be a way to do this where we're not screwing over humanity in the process. Like, there's just got to be a way.
In their hearts, they want to.
I think there's plenty of people you could sort of paint with that brush, but there are an awful lot of leaders who come up to me after my keynotes and say, this is the vocabulary I've been looking for.
Yeah.
It's the frameworks I've been looking for. I've been trying to have this conversation with my board, and I just don't have the tools. And this is so needed right now. And that's what pushed me to write the book, was to put as many of these tools together for leaders to be able to have informed conversations and say, look, if we're cutthroat about this, fine, but if we're cutthroat about it in a way that ultimately sets us up for regulatory oversight that's going to be harsh, we're shooting ourselves in the foot. If we set ourselves up for breaking up by companies or by country oversight, we're shooting ourselves in the foot. And really, just if we think about the ways that people could start popularizing how evil we are, and we lose our market share, we lose market trust. That's important too. Trust is an incredibly important part of the consumer market. And we see a lot of documentation of that in the book. Edelman does a really great job in their trust barometer every year of measuring the impact of trust. And it turns out, as you probably have seen year after these last couple of years, I think the last 3 years have been the ones where corporations, out of all the entities that Edelman looks at, have the highest public trust of any of the entities they study. So it's an incredibly high responsibility. It's a large responsibility for corporate leaders to be able to say, look, we're setting the agenda here. We have to take it upon ourselves to make sure we're not screwing this up. We can at least show some sense of responsibility. And, all the models right now with ESG and sustainability, like all these kinds of things, are a little flawed. They're a little bit too little, too late. There's a little bit of difficulty in using any of them. They don't quite get at the heart of what we need to talk about. But there's something there. There's models, there's tools. We can begin to have this conversation in ways that are measured and can actually get us to a better place.
What do you think of? Go ahead, Leo.
I'm just going to say, I hope you're right. I hope it's not all just great marketing that's giving these companies trust and that they sincerely want it. I think as individuals, they do. I think you're right. When a CEO comes up to you and says that, I think it's genuine. But then the pressures from the board, the stakeholders, the political situation, the environment, and all the other things kind of pile on in. And sometimes I don't know if they can keep the resolve that they need.
I think you're right, and you're realistic to acknowledge that. And I think it's not a difficult thing to be realistic about. But at the same time, I think that there are very real examples of companies being able to demonstrate, true leadership positions. And you don't have to look to Patagonia for that. You don't have to look to the sort of the classics. You can even look at some like Apple resisting, privacy inquiries and protecting user data. You can look at, a lot of kind of classic within the industry examples of companies and leaders taking leadership positions on matters of principle. And when they do that, every time they do that, they're making it easier for the next company leader to do that and the next leader to do that. And I think we just need to create momentum around those decisions and show what they are and really celebrate those. And the more we do that, I think the more vocabulary it gives for leaders to be able to make those kinds of decisions. It gives more examples to talk about in their boardroom. I've been in those boardrooms. I've facilitated board meetings that have been really contentious and really hard. But I think the more you're able to come up with crisp, vivid examples of competitors who are making these kinds of decisions, who are following regulators' advice, who are getting ahead of regulations, who are saying, all right, I know we're in a moment where deregulation is trendy, but what we need to do is build our own governance internally instead of waiting for regulators to catch up with us, because we know that we're going to need to innovate quickly and we don't want to go off the rails. We want to build sustainable technologies and innovations that we're going to be able to stand behind for generations. We don't want to have regulators come after us down the road and have to pay billions of dollars in fines for violating public trust or doing, irresponsible things with data. So those kinds of conversations are a lot easier to have when you have some examples to point to.
What do you think of generally of journalistic coverage of technology and AI?
I think it's a little breathless, isn't it?
I am, for sure.
Right?
Yeah.
He's got no breath.
That's why we have Paris on, to slap me around.
It tends to be, I feel, we get into these moments where there's a lack of curiosity, where we're sort of parroting whatever the AI press release is that came in through the email that day, right? We're allowing that to be the story. And I think we do so much better when we ask the big questions, when we try to connect the dots. There's been some really fine journalism in the last few weeks that I've highlighted on my LinkedIn, for example. The story about the New Orleans Police Department using facial recognition surveillance over the last couple of years without disclosing it.
Illegally, yeah.
Yeah, incredible journalism that surfaced that. And a commenter on my post pointed out, there's got to be more cities that are doing this. It's got to be much more common. I'm like, of course, it seems like that's very common, but it's going to take intrepid investigative journalism to uncover more cases of this before we have the sort of the wherewithal to go after it as a pattern, as opposed to it being a one-off, like hand slap sort of situation.
That's Paris's mission statement, right, Paris?
Yeah.
That's true.
That's why we need investigative reporters. Last question, because we've used up our time, but what do you tell CEOs about adopting AI? I mean, this is almost impossible to judge whether this is a must-have. Is it going to be valuable? Is it going to be detrimental? What do you tell them?
No, I think it's the conversation starts with, again, we got to make sure we understand what it is you're doing as an organization,
the goal?
Right? Like, what's your purpose? And we can work our way through a canvas that I use to think about brand and culture and experience and dimensionalizing all that out, thinking about the data that we're modeling the business in, and then thinking about the technology that we're actually using to build the business. Once we do that with that kind of discipline, we can go totally crazy with experimenting with AI. I love thinking about the wonderful innovations that can happen. But here's one observation is that came through What Matters Next, and I think it's a really important one that I don't get a chance to say often enough. And that is that I think we talk about digital transformation and innovation as if they're interchangeable concepts, and they're actually not. One is more of a playing catch-up. Digital transformation is about playing catch-up to what the market externalities are, where you are in the moment, and innovation is about getting ahead of that moment. And I think if we are in a moment where we're saying, look, all the market has moved to this place where we need to transform to catch up, people's expectations are that there's going to be a certain amount of algorithmic intervention, like you can't do a streaming platform that doesn't have really good AI recommendations. You can't do retail without good recommendations. You couldn't do Spotify or a competitor without AI and recommendations at this point. Like that's just where the market is. So you're going to need to be there. But if you're trying to get ahead, you're going to need to think really totally green space about the whole thing, and you're going to have to go into places that people aren't yet. But you need to do it responsibly, and you need to be thinking about how can we be aligning what it is we're trying to do with what people need to do, and ultimately how can we bring that to a new place. And I think that's where the excitement is, that's where the opportunity is, and that's where we can use a lot of strategic optimism to get ourselves to a place where we're using technology for really good human experiences at scale.
Well, I took the CEO quiz on your website, and I came out really bad. So I think I need to hire you.
Was there a button in there to say, "Are you doing this in the middle of a podcast?" Too?
Well, I thought I should see if I'm a good decision maker or not. And apparently, I don't pay much attention to the future, so that's not good. And I got a cat. I got a cat waving at me. So anyway,
they all have cats waving at you.
Oh, they all have cats.
Good.
Oh, good. Okay, I don't feel so bad.
I think CEOs are probably more dog people. I'm wondering.
I'm a cat person. As myself.
Yeah, well, that's why you're not a good CEO.
There's a lot of cat CEOs out there.
There are.
Well, you got 3 out of 3 here, right? We're all cat people here.
Yeah, that's true.
Which are you? Are any of the above, Kate? Are you a cat or a dog person?
I've always had cats, but I love dogs. I think we don't deserve dogs. Dogs are just too good for us.
Yeah.
So it's an Oops All Cats panel here.
We deserve cats,
right.
though, is the second
Yes, we do.
half of that statement.
We do deserve cats.
The book is called What Matters Next, A Leader's Guide to Making Human-Friendly Tech Decisions in a World That's Moving Too Fast. We can all agree on that. Kate O'Neill, it's been a pleasure talking to you.
Yeah, real pleasure.
Thank
your
you.
website well, take the quiz. see how you do.
Tell us what cat you get.
See what kind of cat you get. Yeah, I can tell you. Thank you, Kate. It's been a pleasure talking to you. Really appreciate it. Thanks for joining us. Kate O'Neill, everybody. So long. Hey, it's Leo Laporte. I hope you've enjoyed this little clip from our programming at TWiT.tv. For more, visit our website, TWiT.tv, or subscribe in your favorite podcast client. There's also a link somewhere down there.